I get a lot of questions about exogenous ketones and how I use them. So I thought it would be interesting for me, hopefully interesting to you, to sit down today to talk a little bit about how I personally use exogenous ketones for exercise performance, but also for cognitive performance, which I think is one of the main benefits of why people use exogenous ketones, kind of one of the benefits of exogenous ketones. I've been using them for a long time, probably for 5 to 6 years. And this is a space that I've been interested in for a while. There's a company known as HVMN, Health Via Modern Nutrition. Way back in graduate school, I started working for HVMN, writing blog posts for HVMN, and getting into this space of exogenous ketones. And at the time, HVMN was selling ketone esters, which still exist, sold by other companies, but now HVMN is kind of now Ketone IQ, and they sell 1,3-butanediol. It's a different kind of ketone, a ketone precursor that your body uses to make beta-hydroxybutyrate, the main ketone body. And so I've been following ketones, using ketones for a long time, and the science initially started out in exercise performance. Researchers were looking at how might these ketones be used during exercise to potentially enhance endurance exercise performance, because during exercise we can burn fat, we can burn carbs. Ketones are this sort of alternative or so-called fourth macronutrient that our skeletal muscles, our brain can use to create energy, create ATP. So the thinking was that if you can provide exogenous ketones, ketone drinks, something like that during exercise, that you could potentially spare muscle glycogen, your body would use this and basically perform better during exercise. There's some pretty interesting literature in the effects of exogenous ketones in exercise performance, but in the last decade or so, it's been pretty underwhelming, to be honest. Not even enough to justify me saying, I'm going to take these before a race and think that I'm going to race better. Okay, so where does that leave us? Well, there is an emerging literature on exogenous ketones and how they can be used for exercise recovery. I actually just finished recording a podcast with Dr. Lat Mansour from Ketone IQ discussing that study, so that'll be interesting to get out and see people's thoughts on that. There was a recent study published using Ketone IQ. There have been several studies published on using ketone esters for exercise recovery. So this is one of the main reasons that I use them now. And I wanted to kind of just sit down and talk about the 3 main ways that I use exogenous ketones. Because I do use them, I get a lot of questions about them. When do you use them? How many do you use? Do you use them before exercise, after exercise, before sleep? Most of these questions coming from social media, because I do post about ketones a lot. In full disclosure, I am on the science advisory board for Ketone IQ. I do a lot of work with them. I write blog posts for them. I am a regular Ketone IQ user. I believe in the product a lot, but I am affiliated with Ketone IQ, sitting on the science advisory board, helping to kind of spread the education and the science around ketones. So before I get into everything, full disclosure there, but I do love ketones. Actually just had some myself, the Grave Energy shot. Everybody should try. It's got a little bit of caffeine too, which is always nice. Okay, so how do I use exogenous ketones? The main way that I use exogenous ketones is to help potentially or help promote adaptations to exercise. I do this for 2 reasons. So back in 2019, there was a study showing taking exogenous ketones during a 3-week period of overtraining or overreaching actually helped prevent some of these overtraining symptoms from developing in cyclists. So when they took a dose of ketones 30 minutes after their workout and then another dose of ketones 30 minutes before sleep, they actually had less overreaching symptoms than a group of cyclists who was doing the same overtraining protocol but not taking exogenous ketones. That is where my interest sparked. Now, recently there have been some studies showing, not necessarily with chronic training adaptations, but acute effects of taking a ketone after exercise. Again, the study that I just talked with Dr. Lat Mansour about, they took 5 doses of ketones 1 dose of ketones every hour for 5 hours after exercise. And what they showed was enhanced blood flow in the femoral artery. They showed increased EPO production, 15% EPO production after exercise when you take exogenous ketones. And all of these other signaling effects that, again, they were acute, but if those things compound over time, could potentially lead to better adaptations, better physiological, structural, functional adaptations to exercise. And that would be supported again by another study showing that in more recreational athletes, taking ketones after exercise led to improvements in VO2 max and running efficiency, running economy, and some other physiological measures. So that's the main reason that I take them. I also think that there is a literal recovery benefit of exogenous ketones, and I really tie that back to the nervous system. So when I take exogenous ketones kind of during training and using them for recovery, I notice a profound effect the next day in terms of just my mental clarity, feeling sharper, not feeling as worn down. I feel that the same day and the next day. So that is my one main use case for exogenous ketones. If I do a long workout, and that would generally be a workout probably 2 to 3 hours. So if it's a 2-hour run or maybe 3 hours on the bike, an extended duration, what I'll call a long workout, long run, long bike. I'll take exogenous ketones after that, but mainly during my main long run during the week, which is often on a Saturday, I will take 20 grams of exogenous ketones. For that, I like the multi-serve bottle because you can kind of dose out however many you want. You know, it has 10 servings in here, so you could do 10 grams, 20 grams, 30 grams, 40 grams, however much you want. I like the multi-serve bottle for that, but I will take 20 grams of ketones after my workout, after my long run on a Saturday. Sometimes 25. I've been experimenting with a little bit higher doses since I have a couple of these multi-serve bottles in my fridge at home. So I take them after my long run, and that's independent of the intensity of that run. So if it's a hard long run with intervals, or if it's just like an easy long run, I will take ketones immediately after finishing that. I really try to finish my long run and take it immediately after finishing that. And then I'll do just my usual post-exercise nutrition. So carbs, protein, just eating the whole foods that I regularly would. So I don't change my nutrition. I just add ketones essentially to what I'm doing. So after my long run. So I'm taking that after long runs. I also take the same about 10 to 20 gram dose of ketones after my interval workout during the week. I typically do one interval workout during the week on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. VO2 max, threshold intervals, tempo run, something like that. I will take exogenous ketones after that as well. And again, I'm really just trying to hit the 2 key workouts during the week that are either going to be, stressful from an intensity perspective, a duration perspective, or both. Because that's where I'm experiencing the most physiological stress. It's also where I'm activating kind of maximally these physiological pathways where I want to get the adaptations. So then I'm going to really hit it hard afterwards in the recovery period and take exogenous ketones. Obviously, you could take them after every single workout. And sometimes I'll take a lower dose, and I'm going to talk about that soon, but a lower dose after just general workouts during the week. If I'm going through a period of really, really heavy training, where I'm, trying to do like a peak week in terms of volume or just like stacking massive volume and intensity, I will almost take ketones every day, maybe a shot, just like a 10-gram shot of ketone IQ or a shot of ketone IQ with caffeine, just to kind of keep that flow of ketones going in there and promoting that recovery process. But right now, what I'm mainly doing is just 2 key workouts per week. And this is what I would recommend a lot of people do, especially if you are cost or product conscious. You just don't want to be going through using ketones, a ton of ketones every single day. Find 1 key workout or 2 key workouts during the week and say, this is where I'm going to use my ketones around this post-workout window. And that is the main way that I'm using them right now in regards to workout recovery. There are days if I'm feeling, I kind of do this on like an ad hoc basis as well. Like if I'm feeling really fatigued after a long run day or something, or I have other things going on, which most of us do, in addition to training, I will just take another dose of ketones maybe like before bed or something like that to help augment that recovery process. And I think they do better when paired with protein and carbs. So I wouldn't say take these and then don't eat for a couple hours. Take ketones along with your post-workout meal, and that's going to have this synergistic benefit. There are several studies showing that if you combine them, it sort of enhances maybe mTOR signaling, enhances glycogen resynthesis after exercise. So I think that pairs perfectly well with like a post-workout meal. Okay, so first use of exogenous ketones after my 2 key sessions during the week, long run and interval workout. Second use case, if I'm using them for pseudo post-workout recovery, but also just as a bridge between my workout and my work during the day. Work could refer to, if it's on the weekend, just your family duties. I don't consider that work, but you're doing something, extracurriculars. And during the week, my full-time job. So I'll finish a workout, and if I'm feeling run down, or sometimes if I'm not, if I'm just, want a little extra boost of stimulation, best use case there, a shot of Ketone IQ with their caffeine in it. So caffeinated Ketone IQ, 200 milligrams of caffeine, 5 grams of ketones. I find that to be the perfect bridge, because what I find there is that the ketones are going to directly provide me with a fuel source for my brain, improving my cognitive function, paired with the caffeine. Obviously, caffeine is a stimulant, so that's going to give me that extra boost. And it's sort of just, instead of maybe having a coffee after my workout, I'm going to have the ketones with the caffeine in there. You're also getting the benefit of the ketones. Then for the post-workout recovery, you're getting the benefits of the ketones for the glycogen replenishment. And then you're just getting the benefit of the ketones and potentially with the caffeine on your cognitive performance. And, based on the results of the study that I just talked about with LAT, these ketones, when combined with exercise, are potentially enhancing angiogenic signaling and blood flow. So if you are somebody who's working cognitively demanding stuff, you're going to want brain blood flow. And so there's the potential there where the ketones are actually going to be enhancing brain blood flow. So that's use case number 2. When the second time that I use exogenous ketones during the week. Use case number 3, I would say another thing, like a bridge maybe between 2 workouts, or if you find that you aren't maybe going to get a full meal in or something like that after your workout and sort of want a little crutch for recovery. I also find that too. So there are some times where I will finish a workout in the morning and then potentially go to the gym to, say, strength train or use the sauna. I will use ketones during that, along with like a little snack to sort of tide me over. Ketones do have an appetite suppressing effect, and while that's not my main goal of taking exogenous ketones, I don't really have any reason to want to suppress my appetite, but can somewhat like stave you off until you can get home and like have an official meal. Obviously, have a little snack with it between then. I find that to be a pretty good use case for exogenous ketones as well, in terms of, pairing them during your workout. So then the third use case, I do use exogenous ketones during workouts. Typically, that will only be though during 1 weekly workout, or maybe 2 weekly workouts that are between 2 to 3 hours. So that might be a bike, or it might be a run. And there, what I'll do is use the caffeinated ketone with the lower dose of ketones, the 5 grams. So why am I cautious about using higher dose ketones during workouts? Not to say that they're detrimental, but I think that there have been enough studies and the physiology maps pretty cleanly that ketones are going to suppress potentially some of what you want happening during exercise, which, if it's high intensity exercise or even moderate intensity exercise, that's carb burning. You want to be burning carbs during moderate and high intensity exercise. Carbs require less oxygen to use, so you're going to be more efficient if you're burning carbs. And they're your jet fuel. They're your jet fuel during exercise. And if you take ketones, there could potentially be a suppressing effect on that, because you're going to maybe use the ketones, oxidize the ketones before the carbohydrates, or potentially inhibit some of these pathways by which you are going to be burning carbohydrates. Nevertheless, I just really don't want that interference to happen. And I don't think that it's occurring maybe at some of the doses, like a dose in a Ketone IQ shot, but I just don't find that it is probably the preferred fuel source during exercise that I want. That being said, if I'm going out for a 2-hour run and it's going to be easier, I have found on nearly every occasion that I've used them, say I'm staying, below 65%, my VO2 max or something like that, an easy long run. Ketones will put me into a flow state during that long run. It happens every time that I take them, and I honestly love it. It makes the run, I enjoy running, but sometimes it's hard to get out there. It makes the run very, very, very enjoyable, almost to a point where I'm zoning out so much during that run where I could just feel like I kind of want to keep running. And I've tested this multiple times. Again, N of 1, subjective. I don't have placebo-controlled tests for this, but if I take the ketone with caffeine or a 10-gram ketone, say like 30 minutes into my run, or maybe halfway through, an hour into my run, or even like right before the run, before heading out, I get in a flow state during the run where I just don't really think about that I'm running. I'm kind of just in it, out there running and really enjoying it. Not saying that it's like a runner high type of thing, or, like you took a psychedelic, but there definitely is some sort of a flow state that's going on there. And it ties in well to like what we know about how ketones affect the brain. The brain uses ketones. When you're in ketosis, you're in this unique metabolic state. So that is a case that I love. I mean, these things for ultra marathon runs, In fact, there have been lots of studies using, ketone esters, not necessarily ketone IQ, but putting yourself in ketosis using an exogenous ketone during an ultra marathon. They have shown studies showing that it increases EPO, but it also elevates dopamine levels and can prevent cognitive decline during the ultra marathon. So ultra marathoners using exogenous ketones, I think that's a perfect use case because you're not exercising so hard that it's going to interfere with your carb burning, and you're going for a long time. So you want those cognitive benefits. So I see this something like if you're running for 2-3 hours or more, the exogenous ketones, ketone IQ could play a super important role there. And again, that's why I use it during a bike ride. If it's a 3-hour bike ride, I'll use exogenous ketones during there as well. Where a case where really fuel substrate utilization isn't a bottleneck to how well I perform, that's when I will definitely pull out the exogenous ketones and use them. So I use them a lot. And one of the main, I won't say criticisms of exogenous ketones, but whenever I talk about using them, whenever I cite a study with exogenous ketones, kind of the main pushback is, okay, well, let's look at the dose. The doses used in a lot of these studies are pretty large. Even the study that I talked about today with Dr. Lat Mansour, the recent study that just came out, they dosed them during the first 3 hours with 0.3 grams of ketones per kilogram body weight. And then in the 2 hours after that, they dosed them with 0.15 grams of ketones per kilogram. So let's use myself as an example. I'm 65 kilograms. If I were to use 0.3 grams per kilogram, that's about 20 grams of ketones. So one ketone IQ shot has 10 grams. So I would need to take 2 shots of ketones every hour for 3 hours, and then 1 shot every hour for 2 hours. So, that's a total of 80 grams of ketones for that post-workout period where I'm going to be using those ketones. And, at what the cost of ketone IQ is right now, okay, that's, if you were to do that, you're not going to do that every day, but say you're doing that twice a week, that's going to be $40 to $50 worth of ketones that you're taking after that exercise session. Most people, myself included, aren't probably willing to do that every single day or even a couple times per week. If you're part of a professional cycling team or somebody who's sponsoring and providing you with unlimited ketones, of course, you can take as many as you want. And, I do get exogenous ketones, and so I can afford, not literally, but, metaphorically, to use them more often because I have, a decent amount of them. But with a lot of supplements, it's a cost benefit ratio. What's the benefit that you're going to get out of ketones? What are you going to have to sacrifice if you say want to use ketones instead of whey protein or some other supplement that you're taking? So you do have to sort of balance, is this worth it for me? Looking at the doses in these studies, a lot of people come to the conclusion that it's probably not worth it. I think that that's a valid take, but you are seeing pretty drastic and pretty significant statistically and sort of just clinically performance related effects of using exogenous ketones. I mean, these things work. If we take the studies at face value, they're small sample sizes, but they're studies, they're showing that these ketones work and they do some pretty remarkable things. They're literally just allowing you to get more out of your exercise session. So the question I think then becomes what are you willing to pay for that? And if you aren't willing to do the 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 grams, after your exercise session, then I think let's just think about then, can we translate this protocol? Can we use a lower protocol? I mean, what it comes down to is getting your blood ketones to a certain level, probably somewhere between 1 and 4 millimolar, a concentration of ketones in your blood. What gets you there is going to be different for everybody, so you're going to have to test that. But it may not require a 0.3 grams per kilogram dose. So I would say get a ketone monitor or, test out ketones, see what gets you into that ketosis level and how long you stay in there after exercise. And that determines your dose. Maybe you just need 1 dose of ketone IQ immediately after your exercise session and then maybe an hour later. And that puts you in that 2 to 4 millimolar range for a couple hours. If that's the case, then that's all you really need. And 2 shots of ketone IQ, I mean, that's, a lot lower than the dose that they used in the study. But if that works for you, then that's, going to be great. I have yet to test this out for myself, but it's something that I plan on doing. I want to know, what's the ketone range I'm in after I exercise and take ketone IQ. So you don't have to use the dose that is used in the studies. Those are just one example of a dosing protocol you can use. You could just use it like I do. I don't dose repeatedly after exercise, although given the results of this new study, I might actually try that on some of my more demanding workout days. But I just take a single large dose after exercise, 20, 25 grams maybe, and then that's it for the rest of the day. Sometimes I'll take a smaller dose before sleep, but you don't have to. So I would say personalize the protocol to fit what you can afford to do, what you want to do. If it's just taking one shot of ketone IQ after exercise, one shot of ketones after exercise, that's great. Try that. I mean, chances are, you're going to get a small benefit. I mean, if you just say, if you're using less ketones than what the studies use, maybe you're going to get some sort of benefit. It's not going to be as drastic. You're not going to get a 15% increase in EPO after exercise, but you might get a small additional benefit. And over time, those things compound. If you repeat it, you take a shot of ketones every day after exercise, that could potentially lead to some enhanced adaptations. So I just think take the protocols from the study and adapt them to what you can afford, what works best for you, with the realization that none of us, most of us, I include myself in that, are not elite athletes, not part of the Tour de France cycling team that are used in these studies where they're just like, use as many ketones as you can. So the studies are a proof of concept that using this dose for this amount of time after exercise works. Who knows if other doses would work better? So that's what I would, that would be my pushback against the criticism is that, well, you don't have to use them. You don't have to use the exact doses used in the study. But if you do, then you at least have one protocol that works. So that would kind of be my framework for thinking about that. But man, I really do just find this space so interesting because, I don't say this, I say this like jokingly, of course, but like, it's almost like cheating, you're just getting more out of your workout. I would think of ketones in the same sort of umbrella as post-exercise sauna, post-exercise hot bath. I mean, in this new study, they found, EPO increased, vascular function increased, angiogenic markers, other angiogenic markers increased. I mean, all that happens with altitude and sauna. So these things are almost mimicking altitude, mimicking sauna. Yes, you have to pay for them, but they're mimicking the effects of these interventions that also require time, also require money. And if it's something like altitude, hypoxia, most of us don't even have access to that. So I really just see ketones as almost a way to, I'm going to call it a hack. They're a biohack. They're a way to hack exercise, get more out of your exercise session. All else being equal, you don't change your training. You don't change your nutrition. You don't change your sleep. You just add ketones and you're going to adapt better to exercise and get more out of your workout. I think that is a pretty cool thing. I don't like to be somebody who says, oh, you should try to hack exercise. You should push yourself up to the level of training that you can maintain and that fits your lifestyle. Run as much as you can until you kind of reach a limit of whether time or mechanically or just demands of daily life. You can't run anymore. You can't cycle anymore. You can't lift anymore. Once you've kind of hit like, oh, I can't really add more training to my routine. Well, what else can I do to get better? Well, I see exogenous ketones as being in that category. And again, that's really why I have adopted them, especially kind of liberally during this marathon training block that I'm currently in. I've gotten exceptionally fit on less miles than I probably would have liked to run, but again, intentionally. So I've run less miles than in previous marathon training blocks, but I have gotten myself to a similar level of fitness as, running 70, 80, 90 miles a week, whereas now I'm running maybe 50, 60, 70, kind of at the peak in some weeks in this marathon training block. But I've gotten just as fit. Granted, I'm biking a lot, but I'm also doing a lot of these little things like heat training, using the sauna, and just using exogenous ketones. I really think that, I'm not saying ketones are the secret to me getting fit on 50 miles a week, but if I'm able to run a 220 or a 222 marathon on this low of mileage, I really think a lot of these things help, and exogenous ketones are definitely playing a role in that. So I'm not trying to sell these things as a miracle supplement, but I do really enjoy using them. I believe in the product. Again, that's why I'm on the Science Advisory Board of Ketone IQ, is because I believe in the product and I've used it for so long. And Michael Brandt is an awesome CEO. He's a kick-ass runner, but he's also doing good things with the company. They're interested in advancing the science and educating people, and they produce a great product that I have used and personally continue to use and really enjoy. But I just wanted to record a short, I don't really know how long I've been talking, but record a short podcast on how I use exogenous ketones. It's probably one of the questions I get the most, I think, because I'm talking about exogenous ketones a lot. But also just because it's an interesting space and a somewhat polarizing space, because, you'll get studies on ketone esters and not necessarily ketone IQ. But when it comes down to it, it's really just about getting your blood ketones to a certain range, and whether you're going to use, no matter what ketone supplement you use to do that, it's just getting yourself into ketosis. But I wanted to jump on and just share some of my practical ways that I use ketone IQ. Obviously, the performance benefits are one thing. The cognitive benefits are definitely another one, though. I mean, just using them throughout the day, if you're kind of like struggling after your workout, you have a bit of a brain fog if you really cooked yourself during a workout, using them during that, something that I've definitely been doing a lot as well. So lots of use cases for it, lots of performance use cases, cognitive use cases, clinical use cases. But those are just kind of three of the ways that I use exogenous ketones and where I have seen the benefits. So I'd encourage people to at least try them out. If you're curious and learning like where to start, feel free to just send me a message or a comment or something like that. I mean, I'm happy to point you in a certain direction about like where you can go to try these things. They're available in a lot of stores now. You can find them in Target. So at least Ketone IQ. So you can go and try them. They're considered a food. They're considered a supplement. They're not banned. I don't think they should be. I don't think they ever will be, even though they increase EPO. But listen, these aren't performance enhancing drugs. They're performance enhancing foods. They're a performance enhancing supplement. That's what I would consider them as being, because they do enhance performance, but they're also potentially enhancing your adaptation to exercise. So I would encourage everybody to give them a try, and hope you enjoyed this little framework for how to use exogenous ketones.